Hello and welcome to the Stacking Dinger Show, your home for all things MLB best ball. I'm your host, Matthew, aka Sheep, aka Dark Sheep. And tonight we are here. We are talking another division. We are talking NL East. If you missed it, last show was the AL East. It was a good exercise. Our goal in these shows is to look through the different teams with a best ball lens. And try and talk through a few things about each team and figure out if maybe there's some things that we're missing, there's some news and all that kind of stuff. Tonight, we are joined by regular co-host Billy and brand new guest to the stage, bringing him on, Owen. What's up, Owen? I will be perfectly honest. I know zero things about you, so give us the Owen spiel.
All right, so for those of y'all who don't know me, my name's Owen Hurd. I'm a 20-year-old sophomore at Indiana University. You can find me on X at Owen_fantasy baseball. It's in the bio there. I work as a minor league baseball evaluator for Prospects Live and a staff writer for Scout the Stat Line. So you can find some of my work there. And other than that, I think that sums me up pretty well.
That's excellent. If you don't mind me asking, what are you going to school for?
Sport marketing and management.
Okay. Excellent. So we brought you on here. We're going to dive right in. Let me share what we got. First off, tonight we have the Atlanta Braves, and we are going to start with them tonight. Again, we kind of have. Let me zoom in a bit here so we can see. We have the depth chart here. First of all, in terms of off-season changes for the team, we have the addition of Jurickson Profar, the loss of some depth outfielders that they had last season. Otherwise, the starting lineup remains pretty much the same. Travis Darnaud is gone, and we are starting now in the spring with some news on Sean Murphy being out. I don't know that Sean Murphy was really a underdog target, and doesn't really bring anybody into contention for underdog. But being a prospect guy, maybe Owen, you have a little bit on Drake Baldwin and his potential maybe now with Murphy being behind.
For sure. I mean, I'm a big fan of Drake Baldwin. Really broke out in a big way. Rose to AAA this year. He's now 24. Just there's so much to like about the bat, and I think that's really what draws a lot of people towards him. Top 50 prospect for me. I do kind of wonder that now with Murphy gone, they have done that Murphy Darno kind of rotation at catcher. So it wouldn't surprise me to see a veteran brought in. But I do think that the Murphy injury will more like with a greater likelihood than not give Baldwin a path to the opening day roster.
Yeah, I want to say they have Kurt Casale and someone else in camp. Another veteran guy in camp at the moment.
Sandy Leone, I think.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. So it could definitely be those guys still with Chadwick Trump. But other than that, no real change in the lineup and stuff. All right, so let's hop over to Roster Resource and look at this lineup. Right now, Roster Resource has Jurickson Profar at the leadoff spot. So, Billy, I guess we have no Ronald Acuna. Timeline looking to be maybe a month, roughly. What is this lineup without Acuna? And how do some of these outfielder pieces fit without him? And then once he gets back, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When I first looked at the lineup that Roster Resource has, the takeaway I had was that we know Acuna is going to go to the top of that lineup when he comes back, and Jurickson Profar is sitting at the top of the lineup too. And traditionally, I've thought of Michael Harris and Ozzie Albies as guys who should theoretically sit up there at the top of the lineup, especially where we're drafting Albies and Harris in best ball. So I thought it was a little jarring to be like, okay, they might be towards the bottom of the lineup or not, and the volume might be a little lower than expected, or that's just maybe capped on how much volume they can get. But it does seem pretty clear that Jared Kelnick would just kind of be washed out from this lineup, and you just kind of shift everyone down a little bit. Absolutely loaded offense, though, projected to be the second highest scoring offense, I think, on a runs per game perspective. Like just looking at the depth charts, like projections, second most wins, second most runs per game. So great team to stack in a lot of different ways you can do it, but it's just a bit expensive.
Yeah. And then, so Owen, when it comes to the lineup and, some of the relevant pieces, do you think, what do you think about, I guess, their chance to bounce back kind of from the dismal season they had last year? Are you feeling, I guess, these guys play a lot, right? These guys play every day, and last year we kind of saw the injury outcome go in the wrong direction for these guys. So is there a correlation, do you think, at all between how much everybody plays and some of the health options?
I mean, I'm not sure, honestly. I think that, definitely can say that it got some really bad, I'd say some of the worst injury luck in the league last year. But I think, like, even looking at this roster without Ronald for the first month or so, 1 through 6 in that lineup are, all-star or close caliber hitters. I think it's still a very good lineup, even if you have to take Acuna back slowly, get him some rehab starts, make sure he's 100% before bringing him back. As for the injury part, yeah, I would say too, health is definitely a big key for this team. We've talked a lot about, we know how good guys like Ozzie Albies and Austin Riley are when they're healthy, but just had those significant injuries that took away a lot of time from them last season. So health is definitely going to be key with this squad.
Yeah, so you talked about 1 through 6, and we look at this 1 through 6 plus Acuna at ADP, basically 65 or under. What do you think about these costs? I think there's a little bit of pushback in the community talking about best ball on LBs and Profar, but what do you think overall about some of these prices we're paying?
I mean, they're definitely a lot steeper than some things I've been seeing. I think in terms of like average overall ADP between Fantrax, Yahoo, and forget the third one, but yeah, Ozuna's in the 50s. Harris, I think, is like 70s, and I think Ozzie is a little bit back. But yeah, I will say I don't love either Ozuna or Harris at that cost.
Billy, where are you at when you're drafting this team?
It's interesting. I mean, they're very expensive, and I think rightfully so. But you compare them to where they were being drafted last year, and they're actually kind of a little bit cheaper in some of the players what you had to deal with last year. So I think that's kind of interesting. But in general, it's like, okay, you're paying Michael Harris is pick 40, 41 for a player who we haven't seen that top end, and you're sitting right next to a guy like Mike Trout, who all sure they both seem to have like some level of like injury risk volume, like questions on how that's going to work out. Like I'm a lot more confident that Trout's going to be a separator, where I'm not sure that Harris is at that price. I think that with him, it's just like it's this like perfect storm of like he's a young player, which underdog drafters love. He's on a team that people want to stack. It's a position that is scarce. So it's like this whole set of factors that make him really expensive. So like I think you're going to see some level of inflated for Harris and Profar because of like the position and the team that they're on. But I think they're kind of like a necessary evil if you want to build out like a portfolio of Braves teams.
I think one thing to monitor too with Harris was last year we saw him hitting out of that 6-7 spot a lot. At that price too, just hitting in that bottom third of the lineup. I think a lot of it too, just in terms of whether he returns his value at that cost, is like where is his spot in that lineup.
Yeah, great point. And I mean, if Profar is going to lead off for a month, that after that, what is his value then too? Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been, betting on Michael Harris. I'm not letting up one more year. Or I need, I still want to see that breakout. So I'm personally there, not getting to too much Profar and even missing on Albies a little bit. All right, so let's take a look at the rotation.
Before we jump to the rotation, though, I do think the bench is a little light. There's not a ton of doesn't feel like there's a ton of, at least that we see it listed there. It's like a ton of players pushing for playing time that's not currently in the starting lineup. It's just Acuna who's coming back from health. Doesn't seem like we're going to come across teams, and maybe not today, but like the Orioles, it's just a big mess on how they're going to fill out their roster on a daily basis. Whereas the Braves play their guys every day, and they don't have a ton of depth to even mix and match. So that's not really a concern that we will talk about with other players.
Yeah, I will say with a team like the Orioles, it's a luxury of riches in a sense, as they can't get Heston Kjerstad into that lineup regularly. But you look at this bench, you don't really have that. You could Brian De La Cruz has got some pop, but just some atrocious strikeout and contact rates. There's not really that guy on that bench that you can plug into that lineup on an emergency basis or as needed basis and just have confidence that they're going to produce.
Yeah, we've seen them add in season when the guys
Absolutely.
go down, and so they've never really had that. So that's a great point, though, Billy. Like if you're worried about the the volume outcomes, there's no sign that they're going to be playing people less. Good point. All right, so when we get to the rotation, we have Chris Sale at the top. I think we should start with him. Owen, last year we saw the Cy Young Chris Sale, definitely worth giving up Vaughn Grisham for.
I'm a Red Sox fan, so that hurt.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I didn't mean to bring up a terrible pass.
Happy for him.
Happy for him. Yeah, he finally did it. But we did see, at a certain point, he couldn't make starts down the stretch when, I think it was a shoulder or something, when they needed him to start. So what do you think about, him after last year and kind of the direction that it went last year?
I mean, I think there's a difference between going into last year, because last year we were looking at an ADP of around 150, if I'm correct on that. I think now you're looking at a guy you're drafting as your first starter. And that's honestly, I love Chris Sale, but at that price, he's just somebody I'm avoiding. I just think that at that, you're looking at him to repeat a Cy Young campaign. And I mean, I think there's just too many questions, concerns, almost 36 years old. So it's at current price, he is somebody that I'm going to be fading.
Yeah, on Underdog, he is in that range of first starter.
Okay.
So, you're not super familiar with Underdog. On pitching is really pushed down, but this is the range. You're taking him, with Blake Snell and Aaron Nola.
That's starting pitcher 7. No thanks.
Yeah.
I think I'd prefer Michael King there, just about 10 picks later.
Okay.
I like hearing that.
After Sale, we have Strider coming back. That's a guy I've been buying into a lot of this year. Just, hoping that he ramps up pretty quick. Seems like they're just kind of slow playing him. He might like if they needed him to pitch at this point, he could be ramping up, but they're kind of slow playing him. Again, about a month missed, kind of similar to Acuna. And then after that, we have a smattering of guys. So, Billy, Ronaldo Lopez, was kind of surprised everyone last year just how successful his conversion back into a starter was. So about throwing him out there in the middle, and then, kind of these late guys, Grant Holmes. I guess I totally missed Spencer Schwellenbach. Sorry. I guess Schwellenbach, Lopez, Holmes, where are you at on those guys?
Yeah, so with Strider, I always want to say I'm a little annoyed that there's no real tangible information to work with right now. It feels like it's like he's there. He's throwing the baseball. I haven't heard anything about his timeline. Is it being positive or negative or what's going on with that? It just feels like it's like, yeah, he's at spring training right now. And maybe I missed something, but I was just like hoping to get some like affirmation at some point. Okay, cool. He's throwing a side session. Awesome.
I feel like I did hear that he might pitch like start one game or so in the spring still. I think that was the last thing I heard, but yeah, not a
Because
lot.
I was sitting here waiting to be like, spring training's going to come. I'm either going to fire it up on Strider and be like, okay, well, we're going ahead with this, or I'm just being like, no thanks. And neither of those have happened, so I'm just a little like disappointed with that. But I want to leave Schwellenbach for Owen because he's had like quite a ascension over the last couple years, last year essentially. I do think Ronaldo Lopez is interesting, and it's like he's the guy that we missed last year. We were on Lugo as a converted reliever into a starter. We were on Michael King, like has that concept as well. Ronaldo Lopez is a guy that we seem to have missed that. Crochet was a little bit more on the radar in terms of like, I think that the Ronaldo Lopez price is a little expensive because we only saw it one time, but it's the profile of what he did last year, which has me very interested in guys like Clay Holmes and why I was really in on him early. So not a huge target, but more of an archetype from last year that was a big success that I want to try to find and capitalize this year.
Okay. So yeah, then Owen, Spencer Schwellenbach kind of, I mean, for me as not of a, a deep bench prospect or whatever kind of watcher, he came out of nowhere. What's your read on him, and just how good can he be this year?
I really think, and I've seen this, seen a few other people say this as well, but I really think he could return top 50 overall value, and I really don't think a top 10 Cy Young finish is out of the question.
Okay, that's pretty strong.
That's good. Yeah.
All right, and then
I will add on Lopez too, if I can. I mean, I think a lot of the knock on him now is like, oh, he greatly overperformed what he was expected to, a big regression candidate. But I mean, I think, still at that price, if you're looking at a guy 3.6 to 3.8 ERA with his strikeouts, who showed last year he can give you those innings, I still think there's some value to be had there.
Okay. What about, diving a little bit more into the Grant Holmes, AJ Smith-Shawver? It feels like last year people were hoping Smith-Shawver made the team. He kind of showed stuff, but I don't think it could, because I did draft some of him. I was looking at some of his AAA stuff. It didn't look outstanding to me. But those two guys, what do you think about them?
I'm still in on Smith-Shawver in Dynasty. I'm still 22, 23 years old. He's still an age where you wouldn't expect some arms to have debuted. And I do think, though, just in terms of 2025 impact, it's a deep rotation there. Ian Anderson is now out of options, even though he's had a rough spring. I do think that they're still going to give him a look there. You obviously still have Grant Holmes, who's shown last year that he could start. So, I think in general, Smith-Shawver in 25 is a guy that I'm a bit more cautious about. I just don't know if we're going to quite see that workload at the big league level there to justify drafting him for a rotation spot. He is a guy that I will say still holding on to in Dynasty, still like in deeper redraft leagues as a stash. We've seen pitcher injuries and just how they could ravage a rotation. So, I will say he does have his value in certain places.
Excellent. All right. Any last notes on the Braves? Otherwise, we will move on to the Marlins. Oops. Sorry, 1 second. Marlins depth chart. All right. So, this depth chart is like, when we're going over,
it's ugly. Just we don't have to get beat around it. It's gross.
Off-season news. I don't even know, because they signed a bunch of guys that and last season they brought in a bunch of guys. The Matt Mervises of the world, and I mean, we can just jump to. Let's just jump right to. Let's kind of skip over this team because let's jump right to the players that are being drafted on Underdog, right? So from the hitting side, we have Xavier Edwards, Jesus Sanchez, Connor Norby has an ADP. Some people are taking some stabs on him, Stowers, De Los Santos. So I'm gonna go to you, Billy, first. On the guys who we have some interest in from last year, Xavier Edwards and Jesus Sanchez. Where are you at on them? And then after that, Owen will hit some of these young guys with you.
Yeah, Xavier Edwards is the kind of guy who just unfortunately what he does from a baseball perspective is not helpful for us realistically. I mean, like scoring points is nice, but home runs are much more impactful from just a points perspective than stolen bases are. So while he may run it up and then get 50 stolen bases or whatever, it's not going. It's just kind of like raising his floor, and so he's just the kind of guy that I'm just not really going to ever get to, based on what he does, which is just somewhat unfortunate. And then Jesus Sanchez is kind of like last case. If you're looking for an outfielder and you need to wrap it up and you feel like you want to get some volume and you're not, rather than like trying to get someone who's a bit more exciting at the back of the draft, has sneakily increased in price throughout the drafting season as people just kind of get pinched at the end of the draft and they're looking for an option, and looks to be kind of like locked into that middle of that lineup, but not overly like inspiring as a talent. I think it's just more of like a pretty comfortable with his opportunity that he'll be given this year. So those are the two, like, I guess, like noteworthy names from that are getting drafted every time.
Yeah, and we look at here on Underdog, Xavier Edwards ADP is 172, and that seems kind of rough for me. I've grabbed him like if he falls like multiple rounds, but if you go over to DraftKings, he's got like 80 ADP, and it doesn't make any sense to me. Somehow over there he is stuck there in the ADP. So if you're also drafting over on DraftKings, you definitely want to avoid him. He just does not.
Like, where does he get drafted in like normal fantasy baseball? Is there like some level of like it just he's actually somewhat valuable in like normal fantasy baseball, and what we do is just he should be like a last round pick?
So on NFBC right now, he has got an ADP of 159 on 15 team roto teams, and I think almost all of that. Well, I mean, it's average and stolen bases that he's giving you there. So, like you said, that doesn't necessarily translate to spike on best ball points. So, unless he goes out and steals 80 bases, it's hard to see for me.
Yeah, and I don't understand that DraftKings price where it came from. Like, it didn't translate from another one. It didn't come from Underdog. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, if you can see who are in lobbies, and once you see somebody take Xavier Edwards over there, try to look to see if they're in more rooms and you want to join them because snipe the rooms. So yeah, Owen, I'm just going to open it up to you. All these young guys in Miami, who's your favorite to like be a potential contributor in 2025?
I'm a little bit worried about the latest report about Sandy Alcantara, that they're going to be limiting his innings early. I think that could hinder his value a little bit. Still at that price, though, I'm still in. Don't really have a strong lean either way on Xavier Edwards. I mean, he'll limit the strikeouts, good walk rate. He'll hit for average. He'll get you stolen bases. I mean, I guess I'd be open to it at that price. Not a fan of Jesus Sanchez at that 197.6 right there. To me, it's almost a Kyle Stowers type profile, big time power potential, atrocious contact rates and K rates. So I just think that Stowers is the better value there a little later. I do like their duo of arms, just kind of almost back to back there with Weathers and Meyer. I think both of those two could break out in a big way. And I like Connor Norby there at 233.9. I think he could be a 2020 guy. So I think at that price, that's a price I like, and opportunity is definitely there for him to get the playing time.
Okay, yeah, let's take a look at that quick. As we're talking about it, we did not necessarily look at the lineup. They're at third base. I guess I don't even know who. I've heard of Derek Hill, but the other three guys on the bench here, so it's not even like there's anybody pushing for time either. When you talk about a guy like Connor Norby,
is there anyone in the minors that's on the way?
I will say Javier Sonoja is a really interesting name. Really good minor league stats. Kind of has I think the opportunity is definitely there for him to earn some deeper league consideration. I'm not a big Davison De Los Santos guy. He was another name that we saw in there. We saw just his average just regress as soon as he was out of the PCL. It's a very chase heavy profile, and to me, this just one that's going to be exploited by big league pitchers. So personally, he's not a guy that I'm really in on. Augustin Ramirez is another guy I think that we could see up in 2025, potentially sooner rather than later. I think potentially even by May. The defense is really the big knock with him, but he is a lot of what you're looking for in a bat first catcher. And then Robbie Snelling, I think he's a later 2025 play, especially maybe post trade deadline. With just the depth they have in that rotation, with the lone bright spot on that team. But those are three guys coming up from the minors that I'd expect we see at some point in 2025.
Okay. Go ahead. Okay, sorry, I thought someone just said it. Yeah, but looking at the rotation, a lot of good, hype coming out of spring on Ryan Weathers. You mentioned him and Edward Cabrera. I think even a Max Meyer is interesting in terms of just taking as a seventh pitcher on an underdog team.
So sorry, it was Meyer to me, but I also I know the surface numbers from Cabrera look really bad, but the command looks a lot better. He's throwing the ball, he's throwing more balls for strikes. So that to me, and I think too, I believe he's out of options, and with the rest of that rotation, I do believe he's going to get a strong look in every shot that he can get to show that he can stick in that rotation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Showing here 0 options. So good point there. Billy, are you drafting any of them as flyers?
No.
Okay. All right.
And I probably should be,
Okay.
just because of I don't feel like they're going to be supplanted. Like Ryan Weathers, what is he real? He probably should be expected 150 innings, right? Is that reasonable?
I think so. Yes.
Somebody has to pitch.
That's what I'm saying. If it's at that point, in the last where he's getting drafted in the last round, someone with upside who's going to get volume as well, that belongs in my drafting pool, even though if he's on a really shitty team. So I should reconsider that for sure.
All right. Moving on to the Mets next. Out for the Mets is basically no one. They brought Pete Alonso back. They brought Jesse Winker back, and obviously the big addition of Juan Soto. Basically returning the team and then adding Juan Soto seems like a pretty good idea. If you want to, make your offense better, why not add a really good hitter? But we have here on Underdog our depth chart. Mets. There we go. Right. So, Billy, we're talking here about, the top 5 being drafted. I guess, what's your thoughts on some of these guys and their price? And then, further down, there's not a ton of love for after 5. They're kind of all flyers. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like with Juan Soto, when he landed in New York, I was like, oh, that's a great offense. But I mean, he was leaving a great offense, so that's like, okay, 1-to-1, nice. And then I was like, okay, leaving an amazing park to hit as a lefty to park that's a little not as favorable. And so I'm like, okay, is that going to be detrimental? And then Baseball Savant has this like nice chart where it's like expected home runs by park, which I love because it's like, okay, Isaac Paredes gets like a big hack when he lands in Houston. But it's like his home runs in moving from New York to New York, that makes me laugh to say, is it's the exact same. So it's like I'm not concerned about him. Like if you're concerned about Soto at all because of like the park or whatever, like you're overthinking it. I think he's great, and he just lifts everyone else on this team to be a little bit better as well because of just like what he's going to provide to the top of that offense. So um, Soto Lindor stacks, while it may be hard to get, it should be a premium if it's available. And then Alonso, where he sits, isn't as easy to kind of align there, but I think that this offense could be one of the best ones not to say the NFL. Well, bad Billy, one of the best in the major leagues, and so I think that the stacking up this offense in some way is definitely a good move from a drafting perspective.
Yeah. Owen, Mark Vientos, we kind of saw the breakout last year. Everyone was thinking that Beatty was going to be the guy, but Vientos really kind of turned out to be the guy that we wanted. He's got himself an 81 ADP, and at this point, I feel like he's being drafted higher even than kind of what projections are saying. So, kind of, what do you think about Vientos this year?
I mean, I do think that at 81.3, it's a little higher than I'd usually be comfortable with. I think around the 100 to 110 range is more where I like him. Just that guy who can get you 30 home runs in those middle rounds. After you've kind of, if you can kind of stomach just the Ks and the walks, which generally around that point I can. I don't like Alonso there, just kind of as you mentioned on earlier. I'm not a fan of Brandon Nimmo there either. I think overall, though, some of my favorite values here are actually Clay Holmes at 188.7 and Francisco Alvarez at 238.9.
Okay, so let's move over to the rotation then. We have Senga. I mean, I guess going back to spring news, we have the Sean Manaea injury. We have the I'm blanking on who else got injured.
Frankie Montas.
Yes, I forgot because he's always injured. we squeezed a few good innings out of him last year in the Brewers, but this what was kind of looking like a pretty deep depth chart has shrunk a little bit. And we have Kodai Senga, who we still don't even really know where his health is at. Yeah, like you said, Clay Holmes is kind of an interesting target. Um, Other than that, like looking at these guys, I've been having a tough time getting to any of them.
I absolutely agree. I still have a lot of concerns about Senga's health. It's just not somebody at his current price in the 130s that I'm looking at. And I will say the rotation in general just has a lot of question marks. You need Kodai Senga to come back and be that ace he was for you his rookie season. You need Clay Holmes to successfully convert and be 2025's Michael King. You need Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning to give you those innings on the back end. You need David Peterson to be that reliable number 3 for you. And I mean, I think in general, like I don't really see maybe a Brandon Sproat debut a little sooner than they'd like should this rotation not hold up.
Yeah. Billy, any other comments on the rotation as currently constructed, and then what is your interest in maybe still a last round Sean Manaea too on a best ball team.
I first want to start off like just mentioning my Clay Holmes like story. I was like so in on him as the off season started, and he's getting completely undrafted. Like when I mean undrafted, not like last round pick. Like nobody's picking him, and like I felt like I was one of the only names. I was walking out with like a 75% exposure, like, and it was just I felt like irresponsible. And and it's like, okay, but the news seems good. He wants 160 innings. I'm like, I'm down for that. And then you get this like 6-man rotation nonsense that they apparently want to do, and I'm like, oh shit, here it goes. Like this is. Then I'm like, okay, I'll stop drafting him and I let it come to me. But like then. And like let my exposure start to wind down, and then he becomes popular again. Now I have to start picking him at pick 180 when I was drafting him at 240. So I'm like annoyed with myself that I didn't have the conviction earlier. But now I'm like, okay, I feel good about the portfolio that I have. So I just want to talk about that little and complain.
It's been an emotional roller coaster.
It has been. It has been. But no, I think that. What was the original question?
Oh no, I was mostly asking about Sean Manaea as well, two things, like how, let's say you didn't have a Clay Holmes 30% at one point, how high do you chase him? And then two, do you think, on best ball, Sean Manaea last round, does he still maybe have some value in, let's say he misses a month?
I think he does have some value in a last round pick, just because of like, he's going to miss some time, and we hate drafting players that are going to have known injuries coming into the season because that's just less time. But like, if you're intelligent about the roster that you pick, you're probably not going to want to pair him with a Strider or something like that. But he's a good pitcher. He translates well to the format, and that's great. And so and I really do think in your last rounds, you only need a couple meaningful starts from them, because in best ball, everything that's bad gets tossed out, or everything where they're not playing is not a problem. So I can see it working. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I guess my fear there is, the injury is, pretty easy to tie to the change in his delivery that really brought his success last year. So for me, I'm too scared that, I can see it going two ways. One, like it's continually going to be a problem on his body for having made that drastic change of how he throws, and two, like maybe he can't keep throwing that way if he wants to keep throwing.
That's an interesting point, that what made him so good isn't sustainable.
Yeah, I mean it could be, but it's pretty easy to make the connection in my head that it's not.
Mm-hmm. I do think that before we jump off the Mets, they have that we talked about limited depth from the Braves. They don't have a ton of depth on their current major league roster too. Like maybe Starling Marte, Jesse Winker platoon is the only rotational. Like it doesn't seem like there's a ton of depth here. Maybe a little Acuna, but I don't know. I don't see a ton of players pushing the starters. Oh, and do you see things differently?
Yeah, one thing I actually just noted coming in was I think that second base spot is going to be one to watch. You have Brett Beatty performing really well out of spring training this year. Luis Angel Acuna performed really well last year. I really don't think Jeff McNeil is significant competition to either. I do think they're still going to want to give those guys at bats if they're producing, and I really think I saw something interesting today. It was Brett Beatty has about half the minor league games that Vientos does, and Mets fans have just kind of completely brushed him aside. I think, and you look at some of the positive changes that he's had with his swing, his average EV, hard hit rate, and barrel rate are all up significantly since he's adopted that two-handed swing that he has now in spring training. And I mean, I know a lot of people like to brush these off, but I really, really, really like what we've seen so far, and I think it can really translate to the season as well. So I think that second base spot with Beatty, Acuna, McNeil is going to be one I'm watching closely because I really don't think McNeil has a long leash at all.
Yeah, and he's not being drafted too much, so in your last year I was throwing him on to Met stacks, but yeah, I agree that his hold on the position isn't big. Acuna does not project as a great hitter, but yeah, that's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I will say another thing that with Acuna is he can play really all over the place. I see him also as a guy who can push Jose Siri out of center. He's that good defensively that you'll take the maybe at best above average contact and speed. I mean, I don't like the hitter either. I think that he was overrated in a lot of sense just as a prospect playing in that hitter friendly Texas league before the trade, and then a lot of his stats just fell across the board. So I mean, I don't love the bat. I do think that I mean, I think like best case, you're looking at maybe an Xavier Edwards type with a worse average and maybe a few more home runs. That's just not a hitter I'm overly excited about. But I think really that his defensive value and just being just as versatile as he is really can't be understated.
Okay. Yeah. And I think he gets a bonus for his last name and as well as for being part of the, the trade that he was a part of for DeGrom. So. All right, let us
Scherzer.
Is that Scherzer? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, let us go to the next team on the list. The up and coming Nationals. They are young. Let's go right to you, Owen. As more of the prospect guy, where is the timeline in your head on Wood and Cruz and Young and some of these young guys that the future is kind of relied on?
I will say I think both Wood and Cruz break camp in terms of just being just the all-star or better. I think Wood has it's a little bold to say this, but I think MVP contender upside if everything clicks for him. I do think both break camp. I think in terms of just those guys that we project and think that they can be. I think this is a team for 26 to 27 is more what I'm thinking. I think you could see a close to wild card contender this year, but I will say this could be a really fun team. They've got the youth with Ruiz, Abrams, Wood, Cruz. Robert Hassel has had a nice spring. They have a lot of depth options for that rotation. That's another thing I'm watching is outside of Mackenzie Gore and Jake Irvin, I really feel like a lot of those spots are kind of up in the air. I'm kind of split on DJ Hers. I don't think Mike Soroka is going to stick as a starter. I kind of like that Nate Lowe addition for them. I feel like they kind of lacked that like veteran leadership, that veteran presence that you kind of need for a team like this. But yeah, I will say this has the potential to be a really fun team with some impact players.
Yeah. Yeah. Off-season stuff. You mentioned it there that they brought in Nate Lowe and Josh Bell kind of do that first base DH combo there. Recently also signed Paul DeYoung. They brought in Ahmed Rosario. So they kind of have some veteran depth that they can move around. Maybe a little bit detriment to some of the guys that they have at those positions, I guess, is what like Jose Tena, I don't know too much about, but the future is Brady House too. Like, I'm
not a big Brady House guy. I will say.
Oh, okay. So yeah, some of these stopgap measures kind of push them down for relevancy for us this year. Billy, we kind of have to pay a price on these young guys like James Wood, Dylan Cruz. I'll just say those guys. We're paying prices on them like they're kind of already broken out. You mentioned we in best ball are always shooting for the moon. So what's your thoughts on these guys in our format?
Oh yeah, I mean this is a perfect example of underdog community drafting. The young, very buzzy players who don't really have a ton of history of doing it at the major league level, but we've seen it a little bit, and we're fully ready to buy in on the asymmetric upside that we're hoping to get. Like there's, and I think it is interesting that from a team perspective, the projection has them like on a runs per game perspective, I think fourth worst in the league. So there is a lot of room for growth in this team, and doing much better than what the public market thinks. But us as underdog drafters, those as a community, very accepting of risk, and just eating our losses because that's just what's expected. I know, like there's some level of like, what are we doing with these guys? If you look at the names around them, there's a lot more proven assets. But as Owen said, these guys got like superstardom in them. James Wood is interesting because he does it through power and speed, right? Whereas Dylan Cruz is interesting to me because I'm not exactly sure what to expect from him. Last year he ran a ton. I don't know if that's sticky or not. And then is there more power in that profile? So just kind of like black boxes right now, which is exciting from what we could get out of it, but also nerve-wracking.
Yeah, and we've talked about CJ Abrams on here being a very up and down sort of producer. So yeah, I'd even put him in the what exactly are we going to get out of him over a course of a full season box too, black box as you said. Yeah, Owen, I'm with you. Moving over to the rotation. As you can see on Underdog, it's basically Mackenzie Gore, and then DJ Hers was kind of a buzzy name, and now in spring it's not been great. So I guess based on last year what we saw and spring, what do you? I guess a little more detail. What do you think the outlook actually is for DJ Hers?
He's a really tough guy to evaluate, and it's one of the arms that I kind of go back and forth on a lot. I struggle with this quite a bit. Is you look at a guy who had just a base and ball per nine coming up in the minors that just screams shutdown closer, high leverage reliever, and then you look at a guy who, when he comes up, he actually he actually underperformed some of his expected stats. Hitters were projected to hit 203 against him. He'll give you those strikeouts. So I'm there's a wide range of outcomes. I'm interested because I can see the upside of a number 2, number 3 with the stuff that he has, but also I can see the floor of just a reliever who can't consistently locate his pitches. So I think at price, I like it. I think you can do a lot worse upside wise in that range. So I mean, in general, I'd say I'm in, but I do think that he's a tough guy to predict right now. Are you getting the kind of sample size DJ Hers, or are you getting the guy that came up in the minors?
That is interesting. I mean, if you're doing it right now. He's not even projected in the starting rotation. So, like, what are they going to do with him? Is he going to start in the minors and make his way to the major leagues? Like, but yeah, it seems like
I will say
yeah, I don't know.
I will say personally, I will say personally, I would take him over Soroka in that in that rotation. Soroka performed much better in the bullpen after being moved out of the rotation in Chicago. I don't really. I know they've said they plan to start him. I just really don't see that. I do think that Hers can still start that season as that number 4, number 5 in that rotation.
I have to throw it out there. The Miracle Trevor Williams 2024 season that was just a blip, right? Nobody's buying that, right?
I mean, if I'm buying him as like a back end arm or like death arm who, like, I don't know, maybe defies projections once again, sure. But if I'm buying him as that like number 3, number 4 that I have to like regularly rely on for innings, no.
Yeah. I have grabbed him in some deep leagues, but not getting there on here. All right. let us move on. Any other Nationals thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I will
Okay.
say, since I didn't talk much about the hitters. I'm not a fan of Dylan Cruz at that price. I think, to me, he's more above average tools across the board. More than that, I think the upside is a bit lower than what you're seeing from guys in that range. I get a lot of pushback for that because everyone is like, oh well, this was the best college hitter in the draft, or he just absolutely dominated at LSU, and it's like I just don't. I kind of feel like I see a solid regular with a couple all-star caliber seasons, not quite that superstar upside that I feel like gets associated with him a lot. So I don't love him at that price. I like Gore, Hurts, and Irvin, all three at that price. I like Luis Garcia at that price. I think he could be a 2020 second baseman. That's obviously a very thin position as well for fantasy. Don't love Nathan Lau there, and I don't love CJ Abrams just inside that 80th pick, but I can get behind that price.
All right. Excellent point, or excellent analysis on Cruz there. All right, let us move on to another team that there's this division. The top three teams, they stayed kind of the same. They're bringing back a lot of what they did last year. Off-season changes for the Phillies is basically bringing in Max Kepler. After that, they're running out the same lineup as they did before. So let's pull over to that. But I think for me, the question, Billy, starts at Castellanos for this team in terms of our drafting.
Yeah, he's expensive, and I don't particularly understand it. I think it's more of like a scarcity thing, and it just seems like it's going to fall off a cliff when he gets drafted. And actually show just outfield when you look at Castellanos, and I think that gives me more okay, the price. You can see why after him the names kind of transition to I feel like a different.
Yeah, here we go.
You got Luis Robert, who's we know his injury history, and then unproven players or oatmeal that's uninspiring. You got Colton Cowser younger, Cruz that's younger, Dominguez that's younger, and then you got these older guys who we know that they are, but we're just not inspired by him. So I'm I think he's kind of I see why he sits there and it lines up from a stacking perspective, but it's not an inspiring pick to damn, hell yeah, I just drafted Nick Castellanos. I'm never doing that.
Is there other things where you fist bump yourself while you're drafting?
Don't look at me when I draft the Rockies.
Okay. Yeah, it's very similar to the Profar price here, I think, in that, they're both teams that are stacked early. Let's go back to the, the full outlook. And, we have, maybe not even always taken together, but if there's potentially three people interested in, oh, hey, I need an outfielder. I have Trey Turner. I need an outfielder. I have Kyle Schwarber. Let me put that together in Philly stack, and then grab Bohm and Stott, and then
and that's a great point. That Harper's an infielder and Turner's an infielder, which makes you not if you do both of them, you're behind the 8 ball at outfield, and you're how do I get there? You need bodies in outfield, and because they're going to dry up quickly. And it stacks. Okay, check. Just move on. Rather than being you might dislike the player, but it just fits the best ball requirements, and so you just do it.
Yeah. My question for you, Owen, on this team, I saw when they signed Max Kepler, they told him that he wasn't going to platoon, and right now Roster Resource has it that way. They have Brandon Marsh as the outfielder platoon. I guess what do you think about those two guys? To me, that's not as locked in as I think is indicated here. But what do you think on that final, platoon outfield spot that they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting too with just having Rojas projected on the bench too, is because if you're going to put one of Castellanos or Schwarber in the outfield, do you want those two really good defensive guys to just, I guess, kind of balance out that outfield to give you some defense out there? I will say I do think Kepler in general is pretty underrated. There's a lot of bad batted ball luck last season. Obviously he had that injury too that cost him some time. I do think, it's a little tough for me to say right now. I do think there's some platoon risk there, but I do think that Kepler can be that solid, just veteran, dependable bat in the back half of that lineup that will, in my opinion, see more days in the lineup than on the bench.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, when we look at how they're drafted for us, they're both going about the same, in our range. This is basically your last pick or second to last pick for your final outfielder. Yeah, I think either of those guys could pay off on teams this year for their price, depending on which one does end up getting more playing time.
Yeah, I think I honestly lean a bit more towards Marsh there. Definitely, I mean, I think it's going to hurt you with the strikeouts, but I do think that he'll get you some stolen bases. He's got some good power metrics. There could be 20 home runs there. So I do think that if it were I had to pick between one. Just looking at they're around the same price, I think I'd lean Marsh there.
Okay. Billy, you got to take on those last guys, maybe even opening it up to Bryson Stott, who's going as a last round infielder.
I think they're all interesting in the perspective of Philadelphia as a lefty is a great place to hit home runs. I love looking at park factor, but not just overall park factor, but the components of it. And Citizen Bank Park is the second best park factor for home runs for lefties. And so that is interesting to me. So from Target Field wasn't bad. It was 10th, 104 overall for home runs for lefties, but a 127 in Philadelphia, I could see him just fitting so well the new location. So Kepler is an interesting name at the back of the draft that's going completely undrafted or just is ignored. So I'm curious if they will split, but if one of them does kind of fall out as they're the guy that nails down the position, we could be looking into a great windfall with that. So yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts there.
Yeah, and again, as we've talked about a couple other teams, there's not really anybody pushing any of these guys out. Rojas for the defense, like Owen said. Owen, is there any prospects that are relevant to hitting side of the Phillies team this year?
They have a lot of intriguing guys at the lower levels. I think I wouldn't rule out a late Justin Crawford debut. I think I'm leaning more on the no towards that. I do think it's possible though. Gabriel Rincones Jr. has had a really good spring. I think he's definitely somebody to watch. Was in AAA last season. He's not really among the names you think of when you look at the top of that system, but I do think a guy that could force their hand at some point should an injury arise. Those are really the two that really stick out to me, with Crawford being more on the unlikely side.
Okay. Moving over to the rotation, we have Zach Wheeler, who has just been the consistent guy. For whatever reason, roster resource have Christopher Sanchez ahead of Nola. I guess maybe splitting up the two righties is the thought there.
No, they've been seeing him throw in the upper nines in spring training.
I will say, unpopular opinion, but I would take Sanchez over Nola, and I really can see Christopher Sanchez outperforming Nola in fantasy this year.
Okay, expand on that.
I mean, I think a lot of what we're seeing from Sanchez, just great commands. Like he'll give you that ERA. Maybe I think he can be 3.6, 3.7. I think with the caliber of stuff that he has, he could be at least an average to above average strikeout guy. So like when I'm looking at, I feel like he's kind of not far off in that level of workhorse that Nola was. Great commands. He'll give you those innings. He can give you those Ks. And honestly, like if looking at him in the same range as Jesus Luzardo, I would take Sanchez a good 30 to 40 picks higher.
Yeah, I'm out on Luzardo. But that's interesting. Yeah, we didn't really see the K rate last year, so you think there's a room for improvement there?
Oh, absolutely. I think he hasn't. I don't think hasn't been anything about this. He's hinted at this though. Is that adding a kick change to that arsenal, which I think could be really really beneficial. And I think just looking at the step he took last season, I definitely think there's a lot more upside there. And so like, I mean, looking at Noah, like gave you innings, but also just another thing too, like just towards the end of the season playoffs, Nola was not a guy in fantasy that I wanted starting.
Okay. All right. What do you? Any other takes on these deeper pitchers, Billy?
I just want to say the Luzardo clip about him giving up 3 home runs and his manager being on ESPN getting interviewed in that moment is just too good. like that is just an all-time great clip. No, I think that like the Andrew Painter is the one that right, that he's the interesting. Is he? But I don't think it doesn't seem like he's a part of the plan for this year. If it is, it's going to be later in the season. But yeah, I think that's probably the only intriguing name. Is that a fair assessment of his timeline, Owen?
Yeah, I will say I think a lot of people look at Painter as like, oh, pre-injury, there was a shot that he could have broken camp with that team. I do think that you're looking at more of a summer call up. Obviously we've seen Luzardo with injuries in the past. I do think that should he get hurt, he is that kind of that next man up. But he was great in the AFL. We saw that, but I do think they're going to want to build him back up a bit before giving him that MLB debut.
Yeah, and how much volume does he actually get? But that is interesting that you mentioned.
I guess I'll say. I mean, I think a best case scenario. Quite honestly, I don't think you're seeing him get 100 innings. I would say 70 to 80 is within reach.
Okay. So, I mean, in terms of this game, we might want him to come up later and throw those in once we get to the playoffs in these contests. All right.
I will say just for comparison's sake, he's around the same price as AJ Smith-Shawver. I think I'd take Painter there. I think you're looking at just more of a clear path to that rotation, even coming off that injury. The stuff is better. And yeah, so yeah, I think, there's, I think that like, even like, they've got some really dependable guys in that rotation with Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, and Sanchez. But I do think that Painter could force their hands a bit more than Smith-Shawver could.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Both guys aren't being drafted a ton, but that is a good comparison that we had tonight. Okay. Any other items on this team then? If not, we did it. We made it through the NL East, right? Yeah, I didn't forget any team.
No.
Excellent. So there we go. I didn't ask these guys last night, but in the last episode, but just for fun here, who is the winner out of this division? So Billy, who wins this division?
I grew up in Atlanta, and so I'll take the Braves. I'm looking at the betting markets right now. They are the favorite, but I do think it is going. I mean, it's a 3-team race. It's the Braves, the Phillies, and the Mets. I'm so excited to watch this division. You have from a projected win totals, you have the Braves at second most, the Mets the third most, and the Phillies at the fifth most across the league. So I think it's going to be highly competitive. So I don't know. I'll just be a homer and pick the Braves.
All right, Owen, are you going with the chalk?
I'm gonna go maybe a bit. A few people may disagree with me on this, but I'm gonna go slight edge to the Phillies. I do think that just looking at it as stands, I think it's the best combo of solid lineups, solid rotation. I think when you look at just some of those other teams, there's just a few bigger questions there as it pertains to the Braves, just the back half of that lineup and the health. And then you look at a team like the Mets, it's like, what is that rotation outside of maybe Clay Holmes and Senga? So I do think that, I'm going to lean the Phillies. And, we've seen in previous years, they get hot when it matters most. So I do think that's the team I'm going to go with.
All right. I'm with you. I'm going Phillies. Part of it is just hoping, just because I feel like they're reaching kind of the end of their window with the age of some of these guys. So
agreed.
Yeah.
I will say we have seen them win this division before with a similar lineup that they do now and a better rotation, worse rotation in my opinion. So I do think that they're definitely a team that belongs right up in there, if not better than the odds of the Braves and the Mets.
And now all the Mets fans that are angry, go give us that engagement and put your angry comments in the video. Tweet at us, get all riled up. But yeah, it's definitely a close one and hard to really hate anybody saying any of those three teams. All right, we have made it through the NL East. We will be going to the Centrals next week, so stay tuned for that. Owen, it was excellent to have you here. Thank you for joining.
Of course,
Billy,
thank you all for having me.
Billy, yeah, it was okay to have you here. I'm kind of stuck with that, but no.
Yeah, I won't show up next time. No, yeah, as always, it's great to be here.
All right, so for Owen and Billy and myself, we only have a few more weeks until the season. It's getting there, so go get drafting and let's fill some lobbies.